So for our case study, we chose to write about caretakers who worked for both of my grandparents in the US and Hong Kong. We compared the similarities and differences in both treatment and housework. To start off, my US grandmother's caretaker, Beth, has only been just recently working for my grandmother. Before coming to the US in the 70s, she was trained as a nurse in the Philippines. Her educated background gave her an advantage over other Filipino workers who were unskilled and looking for jobs in the US. When Beth arrived to the US, she was able to stay because of her sixth preference green card, which gave her the status of a permanent resident. The sixth preference employment category allows migrant workers to apply for citizenship after working in the US for a number of years. Now Beth lives in Daly City and has family connections in San Francisco. Before she worked for my grandmother, though, she worked in a nursing home, caring for up to 8 patients at a time. She described this job as hectic and exhausting because she only had limited time for each patient. She had plenty of responsibilities too, like feeding them, making their meals, caring for them, monitoring their behavior, stuff like that. But now she says it's easier to work with my grandmother because she only works with my grandmother. She says it's much more relaxed, and she only comes over about 2 days a week. My grandmother greatly appreciates her work, and all my relatives who stop by treat her very nicely and give her breaks whenever needed. For Hong Kong, it's not uncommon for families to hire maids or caretakers. However, the work there is much harder and employers are stricter. Normally, a caretaker's job begins around 7 in the morning and ends about 10 at night. Throughout the day, the maids cook all meals for the family, clean the household, buy groceries, and for families with young children, take the kids to school, and may even become to and from school, and may even become a tutor for them after school if needed. These maids work long hours and almost all week long, but luckily they are required to have one paid day off each week. Even though treatment and work is stricter and tiring, the Filipino maids are educated enough to know their rights for vacation time and days off. They know that they can report their employer to the Hong Kong government if treated wrongly. Although some employers don't like the idea of their maids taking a day off every week, they need to because they do not want to get fined. Also, the employer and the maids communicate speaking English because Hong Kong used to be a British colony and the Philippines used to be a US colony. So there is no language barrier between them. Some of our key findings were that the US, like many other receiving countries, prefers to hire migrant workers from countries it already has ties with. Because the Philippines were previously a US colony, the US government trusts the Filipino government that the Filipino government would send good migrant workers over. However, just because these workers are more trusted does not mean that they'll be able to apply for a citizenship to stay in the US. Even educated professionals like doctors and scientists may need to leave. It all depends on the immigrant employment preference that they have, which I mentioned a bit earlier. Another key finding is that not all caretakers are treated equally in Hong Kong. The Indonesian caretakers find it harder to work in Hong Kong because of minimal possible communication methods. They are limited to the small amount of Cantonese they learn at recruitment camps before heading to their destination country. Because of this, they are unaware of gimmicks contracts may hide, and some employers take advantage of this. Filipino maids, on the other hand, have learned English back in their home and can speak to their employers with less difficulty.
Hello everyone, this is Brett Harrison here with my portion of this group essay. So to give you a quick rundown of what I worked on, I took our core case study, Filipino caretakers, and I researched other kind of similar case studies that kind of have the same subject with women going out to work and everything. And then I just analyzed them a little bit and put together a compare and contrast kind of presentation for you. Specifically, our group topic was reconsidering migration and agency, namely in female migration. So our focus was on women as becoming free agents, which is basically them being individual migrators. They didn't rely on their husbands as much, or were they simply staying at home to be housewives. The new global trend is for women to be increasingly mobile inside their workforce. They now have more options. They're free to do things that are totally independent of their husbands, like I said, and this really shows in the way that they choose to migrate out, either locally or internationally, to find new jobs. Although this trait is kind of more common to single women who aren't married, we also see a large portion of these migration. Although this trait is kind of seen more as something that single women do as opposed to them being married, we actually see a large portion of these migrating women are actually married, and even in strong although this trait is seen more as something that single women do, we are seeing an increasing number of married women who are also branching out and going to work despite being married, and especially even in societies that have a strong tradition of a patriarchy, we're actually seeing them being more and more relaxed, and women having more and more mobility and having even greater opportunities to work and be away from the house and avoid just being a simple housewife. And even in those countries where women aren't exactly free to do exactly as they please, we see kind of the roots growing where one day they will be able to freely migrate internationally, domestically, wherever they wish to go, as free agents of migration. So for my first example of another case study, in China, especially rural China, it's found that most women are not as mobile as men, but the feminization of migration challenges that opinion. I found an article by Yuzhen Liu that describes and analyzes the movements of mainly rural women in China going to more developed places in their country like Guangdong in order to work. I included a map in the slide just to give you a nice visual of where they're moving. So at the top you see the village that was given in the text, Sili, and down below you see the city of Guangdong and the long journey that these women make in order to work. Liu interviewed a lot of these women, and in those interviews she found that they had a lot of motivations for going to work. Some were simply financial. They sought to pay for projects like household construction because they were renovating or finding a new home, or they were caring for relatives. A few were trying to pay for their education of their children so they could have better lives, grow up, and get the education they need in order to have a career and everything. But also, women had some non-monetary motivations, like simply they wanted to get away from a bad marriage. Their husbands were driving them crazy at home, or sometimes the relationship was just simply toxic to them. As you may think, a lot of marriages in rural China were arranged by parents, so it was pretty common to have a bad marriage in rural areas. Other women still actually found some redeeming qualities in the work. They went to better themselves. It helps, of course the money always helps, but they also found some self-development in the work. They found themselves to be more independent, and that kind of contributed to their motivation. And just like the Filipino caretakers, they're drawn to work, because of the opportunities that it presents, and they do it independently of any husband or anything, and that's really important because it really relates to how the Filipino women will go or be recruited in jobs and will go just for the opportunity and to improve their own lives. So my next example draws heavily from the book Problems of Working Women in Karachi, Pakistan by Ifat Hussain. In this text, the author describes the rising of women as in the workforce in Pakistan, especially around the city of Karachi, where he conducted these interviews. With over 240 interviews, the author then takes these women and categorizes them into 3 different levels of, depending on their occupation and their salary. Where the first would be domestic workers with a low salary. These women came from mostly rural areas and didn't have much job experience. The next one up would be sales clerical workers who work many jobs, which includes teachers and things of that nature, with a kind of medium kind of salary. And then in the third category, they had managerial and executive professionals, and they had the highest salary and standard of living of the 3. Hussain kind of goes into the backgrounds of the 3 categories, and there you kind of see the motivations of why the women are working. In the first, they come from really low wealth families, and they don't really have much opportunity to search for other jobs besides the ones that offer domestically. Next up, you have women who come from not so wealthy families, but the families have worked to give the girls education and better themselves in order to get better careers than they would otherwise. In the third, the women actually come from fairly wealthy families where the men in the families, the fathers, the husbands, work enough and make enough money such that these women do not need to actually work at all for financial reasons. Whereas in the first and second, the income attained from a job actually helps the family and helps the household survive. But in the third category, these women purely work for intrinsic value as they go to better themselves, to go for self-development, and what's really interesting is they go independent. They really embody the free agent of the migration system. I then kind of took this whole hierarchy of Ifat, and then I kind of applied it to our model of Filipino caretakers. And I really considered our Filipino caretakers to be kind of in the middle, in the second kind of category. Most would come from rural, low wealth families, and these Filipino women may get some training, job training, or whatever, and they will aspire to get those better jobs than just being house workers. So that's where I kind of. So one of the major trends that we see is basically the general growth of women in migration. So over the past 20 years, they've grown to be over half of total worldwide migrants. One may find that most are due to family reunion. Those are the ones actually following their husband, or some women are being trafficked. But what I want to argue is that a good portion of these women, or pardon me, a good portion of that migration population are independent women who are rising on their own and going out to find their own jobs, independent of men. And just to relate that to another trend, it just seems that a lot of those independent women are going for domestic jobs or the caretaker style jobs in other countries because of those countries' demand for that kind of labor. Developed areas like the United States or Hong Kong, and their citizens, are usually the ones who search for higher skilled jobs, and therefore that leaves open the lower domestic jobs that are then really desirable for foreign workers. And in my research, I actually found an article that describes how many employers will look for foreign women for their care work jobs, and specifically for Filipino women. And I'd just like to finish up by saying that the women that go out, especially the Filipino women that get the job training, get what they need to go out and travel to places like the United States and Hong Kong to work, really embody that free agent kind of vibe, because they're moving for themselves. They don't move with a husband, and they're either doing it on their own accord or as the heads of households, and they really embody that whole idea of free agent. Thank you.